This episode will contain some very sensitive and triggering matters. I would not continue to listen or watch if you are around children or if these topics may bother or offend you. As the regular season of professional football comes to an end, all 32 clubs usually announce their nominees of one of the biggest honors in the league, the Walter Payton Man of the Year Award. Now, this is a player that is usually a pillar in his community, going above and beyond on and off the field. Now, the man that award is named after, I didn't really know a lot about him. Yes, I'd heard of Walter Payton, but I didn't know his nickname was Sweetness. I knew his family was still very much involved with the award and would be seen recognizing the latest honoree. I didn't know much else about him. I figured his name must have carried a lot of weight though, because how often does anyone get anything named after them? But I learned a lot about him over the last 3 weeks. And what I learned uncovered all of the layers of the football icon. He played college ball at Jackson State. He was the rushing yards leader during his time as a Chicago Bear. He held the rushing touchdown record too. And above everything, he was this effortless humanitarian. I came across countless stories of his selflessness when it came to his fans and teammates and everybody in between. How he would visit sick children in the hospital after games with playoff implications. Or how he would keep obligations to make appearances for local youth sports teams that others would have blown off. How he'd encourage practice squad guys or undrafted free agents that were likely to be cut from the team. All of this adds up to the allure and the magic of Walter Payton. But while we can get caught in that, let me remind you that he was very much a human with all his imperfections as well. For instance, Walter was somewhat selfish when it came to the game. He wanted to be the reason why the Bears won, which was something he struggled with in his latter years as they shifted to a more pass-focused offense. And though he would appear to be humble for the public, he really did care about what people thought of him. He maintained this appearance of the perfect family man, married to Connie and the father of Jared and Brittany, but his reality would be revealed after he died in 1999. Now, for some, they may think that blemished his name, but honestly, you know how I feel. I think it just reminds us that he's a human like you and I. So now, for our second episode in the football series, we're gonna reminisce on the love stories of Walter Payton. And hey y'all, shout out to everybody that's watching whose teams are 2-0. But if you're new here, this is I'll Tell You What. Now, I'll Tell You What is a weekly podcast that shares the weddings, marriages, and romances of Black figures throughout time. We bask on these relationships not to be messy, but to remind you of the passion in our past and to humanize the people we put on pedestals. Basically, it's all love. Black history. And I'm Ashley, your favorite raconteuse that tells you these stories every single week. So I'd be remiss if I didn't remind you to subscribe and follow us everywhere you can, and no matter where you listen or watch, please leave us a podcast review too. And hey y'all, welcome to the 18th episode of I'll Tell You What. So Walter Payton met his wife Connie when he was a junior at Jackson State. The way they met wasn't a cute collegiate tale of how they took the same classes or he bumped into her at a sock hop or party or homecoming or something. No, it was actually manufactured by his football coach, Bob Hill. So at the time, Walter was in this on-again, off-again relationship to a fellow student named Lorna Jones. And at that time, the status of his light switch relationship was off. Well, he had started dating Lorna back when they were freshmen, and that was when he was still in the shadow of his brother's reign as a football player for Jackson State. Now, after his brother left, Walter was utilized more, and Coach Hill realized that actually he was a better player. So once Walter became a known fixture of the football team, he started to receive more attention. You know what that means. He ditched Lorna and the plans that they would make, only for her to hear about that he was allegedly with other women. So because Lorna wasn't with the stuff, they broke up. But Walter would be so heartbroken that he'd get back into her good graces, only only to disappoint her again, and they'd do this over and over. Well, this would start to distract him from football, and his coach clocked it. So at the time, Coach Hill was dating a lady from New Orleans named Betty Billette. Betty had a niece named Connie Norwood that Coach Hill wanted to introduce Walter to. Connie was a high schooler that was described as a, quote, soft-spoken cheerleader with light cocoa skin and almond-shaped eyes. Now, Walter would call Connie, and they talked on the phone for several hours. Connie met him once when she came to college for a visit. Walter, still so distraught over his failed relationship with Lorna, just whines to Connie the whole time about it. So, obviously, Connie was like, I'm good, y'all got it, be blessed, and went back home. But Coach Hill was like, nope, nope, nope. I'm going to make this happen. He bought Walter a ticket to New Orleans to visit Connie over the weekend. And you know what? That actually worked. Connie began to like him during that trip. They would continue to keep in touch once he got back to school. So determined to keep all potential obstacles away from Walter and Connie so they could be together and he could get the attention of his best back, Coach Hill put on his best future impression and voila, magic. Got Connie a scholarship to the school. Now, allegedly, he went to the president of the university and, quote, insisted she get a full ride. So in 1974, Walter entered his senior year at Jackson State with no worries in his love life as his girlfriend Connie joined him on campus as a freshman. So, you might wonder, how did the relationship between Walter Payton and Connie Norwood fare once he left school? Well, as a senior at Jackson State, Walter was going to declare for the draft. And he did. With the fourth pick in the 1975 NFL Draft, the Chicago Bears selected Walter Payton. He moved to the Windy City while his girlfriend Connie continued her studies at the university. Well, Walter hated Chicago. He hated the weather, he hated the facilities, he hated how cheap the front office was, he hated, more than anything, being alone. His introduction to the league was not a smooth one, and he kept a picture of Connie in his locker, and that would provide brief solace to an overall stressful rookie season. Now, his mom would come up to stay with him from time to time. She cooked him food, and ultimately that wasn't enough, nor were the phone calls or occasional visits that he would get from Connie. So he asked her to move to Chicago with him, but as a sophomore at Jackson State, she said, nah. He thugged it through the season though, which ended in a 4-10 record, and headed home to Mississippi during the offseason. Now, before he was to return to Chicago for training camp, he asked Connie again to accompany him. He knew another miserable and lonely season was in the near future and just could not do this again. But she told him, if you want me to come up there with you, then you need to do it the right way. Connie wasn't trying to uplift her life 700 miles just to be somebody's living girlfriend. Like, be for real. So the next day, Walter gets her a ring and gives it to her and starts working on the wedding. Now, don't start to think that Walter is planning some like very over-the-top beautiful wedding that every girl dreams of. No, this was obviously a solution to a problem that was mostly his. So he contacted a local pastor near Jackson State, reached out to 2 friends to be their witnesses. Now, usually when one is getting married, that's basically the only thing they're doing that day. But nope, the day that Walter and Connie were supposed to get married, she went to the mall with her friends. So when she got back home, she found Walter sulking. He said, quote, first you're gonna make me marry you, and then you forget the day. So because he was big mad with Connie, she was like, come on, let's go. And on July 7th, 1976, Walter and Connie went to the church and got married. Now, their parents had no idea. Sure, they were aware of their children's relationship, but really was left out of the engagement and wedding process for a reason. Apparently, Connie told her mom that she realized it would have been a huge financial strain on her family for her to be able to have the wedding that she wanted from them, right? I mean, of course, like families were paying for weddings. So she also let them know that, by the way, despite having a full ride to school, I'm actually dropping out now and I'm going to move to Chicago with my man. How you think her mama reacted? Now, after they got married, Walter and Connie Payton lived in a small apartment in Wheeling, Illinois. By the time they were 3 years into their marriage, they would have moved into a house in Arlington Heights and would have gotten a giant Airedale Terrier that they would name Sweetness. Now, in 1980, Walter and Connie would have their first child, a little boy named Jarrett. Now, those that knew them found their relationship to be somewhat interesting. To outsiders, allegedly, they didn't seem to be in love. Like, Connie was a doting homemaker and Walter was a professional athlete. Though, nobody doubted if Walter actually loved her. It just felt like their relationship looked like it was done more out of convenience than passion. Initially, Walter was a committed husband and father. I mean, well, as far as that can go, right? Like a lot of men, he let his wife take care of baby Jared, and a few years down the line, baby Brittany as well. Now, he didn't really change diapers or wake up in the middle of the night. You know, a lot of men from that era felt like their responsibility was to keep the bills paid, food in the fridge, a roof over their heads. They were providers. And even then, they limited themselves to that role and that role alone. As he started to gain some notoriety, a man that used to be somewhat of an awkward somebody started to delight in the attention he received from the opposite sex, much like he did when he was in college. Now, by the 1980s, Walter would sadly succumb to temptation, allegedly. During road games, he would entertain various women in his private hotel suite. Donna Vanderventer, a secretary for the Chicago Bears, said that, quote, "These guys go out and the girls are swooning. And unless they're strong, dedicated family men, it's all about feeding the ego, and women feed egos." Now, allegedly, one woman that really fed his ego was a 20-year-old model named Angela Smythe. They met at the 1984 Chicago Auto Show that would take place annually every February. Now, Walter was a spokesperson for Buick, and since 1977, he would attend the show every year. Now, while his wife was at home with their son, Walter would begin an affair with Angelina, allegedly. When reflecting on their relationship later, Angelina realized it was wrong and that it had a lot of flaws. I mean, well, for some that engage in, tawdry situations like this, they would have an awakening that stops them before anyone gets hurt. And for others, well, they leave with a souvenir of the romance. So in May of that year, Angelina calls Walter and informs him that she was pregnant and she was going to keep the child. Now, Walter was upset, but he did what a lot of men in his position would do. Quote, he had an accountant work out a financial package that included a $50,000 trust and an agreement to pay child support through the child's 21st birthday. All of this, though, was contingent on the news of this child never becoming public. Walter and Angelina would sign the documents just weeks later after she gave birth to their son Nigel. Walter, likely internally fighting with his conscience, did not see his son, who was just in the next room. He said it would have been too hard. And just 2 months after he signed the paperwork to help with the financial future of his love child, Connie delivered their daughter, Brittany. So Walter Payton is an example that some of our icons are flawed. I mean, he was human after all. So by the middle of the 1980s, he had an estranged relationship with his wife, Connie, and was somewhat of an absentee father to the children they shared, and had a secret love child basically in the town next door. And his wife didn't know about it, allegedly. But you know what? Let's talk about some of the good things, right? He was able to move into his new home he built for his family on 5.5 acres of land. That's a big house. Like, this home consisted of 5 bedrooms, 6 baths, a lake with a man-made beach, a mini golf course, and a soundproof gun range. Now, during the 1984 season, he also made his 7th Pro Bowl and rushed for almost 1,700 yards. And if you did not know, that is a lot. In the following year, he would surpass 1,500 rushing yards and make it to the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl, despite not scoring a single touchdown in the 46 points they scored over the Patriots. But we're not talking about that today, obviously. But that Super Bowl was a very celebratory moment, as it would be for any player, especially one that was as tenured as Walter. But that weekend, he decided to have his cake and eat it too. Allegedly, as his wife and kids arrived in New Orleans, so did a lady friend of his named Jennifer that he flew out. Now, was Walter not satisfied with married life? Maybe. I mean, perhaps he felt like he had to marry for stable companionship, but once he was afforded the luxury of access to women due to his celebrity, he couldn't help himself. I mean, obviously he could, but perhaps he was just following into the footsteps of his father, who was also known to have stepped out on his mother, allegedly. Now, by the time he retired in 1987, his marriage was non-existent. Rather, those that knew him around that time only thought of Connie as the mother of his children, not his wife. And honestly, he wanted a divorce, but not while his kids were still young. And Connie, I mean, what does she know? Some would assume not much, but I doubt that was the case. Because you see, when a notable spouse is a philanderer, most people speculate that the wife is unassuming or either very content with their situation. But how many opportunities do we really get to know how she truly feels? Not much. Now, one sentiment I keep coming across many times in my research is how they're usually encouraged by friends, family, advisors to stay put. Like it's easier to be the wife than the ex-wife. Like accept your reality and keep your coin in your comfort, girl. They're reminded that despite the infidelities, he's a good man. Women, especially Black women, are always told to accept the good man that is in front of her, when that average honor bestowed upon him is usually because he's cordial, doesn't publicly embarrass you or not that often, and can contribute financially. But honestly, can I just say, why are we always being told we have to have a good man, not a great man? Where are the great men at? You know what I'm saying? But Connie wasn't a fool. By the time of Walter's Pro Football Hall of Fame induction, allegedly, he was seeing a Puerto Rican flight attendant referred by the pseudonym of Lita Gonzalez in his unofficial biography. They met shortly after he retired and began a relationship. But at that point, she was proud of her boo of 5 years for his honor and was definitely coming to the ceremony, despite the reality of his wife and children being there as well. Now, Walter was seated next to his wife and Lita sat next to his publicist on the second row. He urged his team to keep the two women away from each other the entire weekend as he didn't want a disastrous scenario. Lita, however, was aware of Connie, but Connie wasn't aware of Lita, or so Walter thought. After his induction speech, Connie went up to Bud Holmes, Walter's agent, and asked him to introduce her to Lita. They spoke cordially, I might add, and allegedly Connie told Lita that she could have him. Now, with this assumed arrangement blessed by his wife, you might suspect that Walter would be more at peace. He definitely would not be. Now, Walter Payton's wife likely was aware of her husband's extramarital relationships, and he likely knew it too, but that didn't make it any easier because by 1994, about 6 years after he began to date a Puerto Rican flight attendant named Lita Gonzalez, she requested more commitment from him, allegedly. Knowing that Connie knew about her and didn't care, she requested that Walter get a divorce so they could finally be together. So he filed. But this act was done solely to appease Lita. Like, look, see, I did it. But instead, it ended up pissing Connie off. Also, allegedly, Connie informed his team that she would burn this whole thing down. Don't play with her. Well, she didn't say that, but basically she did imply that she would go public and let the whole world know that his squeaky clean image was a farce. Again, allegedly. Now, Lita was the boldest of his mistresses. Others would quietly accept the fate that was dealt to them, but no, not Lita. After her years in the trenches, she wanted what she felt was due to her. Also, around this time, Walter might have been depressed. In addition to his relationship woes, he was dealing with financial difficulties due to bad spending habits and poor investments. That plus a lot of former players struggle with their place in life after they quit playing. Walter, unbeknownst to Connie, had cycle-of-sue ideations where he'd frequently threatened to end it all. Now, usually, only a handful of close friends and his staff would be the ones to hear of these perilous warnings, but thankfully, he never made good on those promises. Now, one thing that would bring him pleasantries is the time he spent with his kids. Walter wasn't always the most present father like a lot of athletes are, but it seems he tried to make up for it later. His son Jared found an interest in soccer and football, and his daughter Brittany ran in track and field. Now, he attended his kids' sporting events and even tried bringing them into his world more. What he didn't know then was that he didn't have as much time with them as he probably expected. So by the summer of 1998, Walter Payton began to recognize that he was sick. His appetite was decreasing, his eyes were yellow, and he had stomach pains. Testing revealed that he had primary sclerosing cholangitis. Now, this is usually the first diagnosis before one learns that they have bile duct cancer or cholangiocarcinoma. He told Connie and the kids that he had a liver condition and needed a transplant, but don't worry. He played down the diagnosis, maybe because he didn't want to scare them or honestly come to terms with the reality himself. Now, he began to leave pieces of his legacy, though. He started to write his autobiography, Never Die Easy, which was somewhat of a fictional take on his life, according to those closest to him. The book was published after he passed away. Now, when his son, Jared, sat by his parents as he committed to go to the University of Miami, people noticed how sunken Walter was. Rumors began that he had AIDS, which lended itself to other rumors about him that he was gay. Now, society's limited knowledge of celebrities and disease is something we're still dealing with, and we saw even as recently as the passing of Chadwick Boseman. Lots of loud assumptions, not a lot of compassion. Now, while Walter wasn't gay, he was sick. He wanted to make an announcement during his radio show with his son by his side. Now, what happened instead was that Connie showed up with Jared. She sat down next to him and put her hand on his back. That had this man hot, okay? He hated that Connie included herself in this moment. Also, he was still with old girl. Like, he pulled his people aside and was like, who invited her? He angrily went back and continued with the press conference and told the listeners and the media about his condition and that he was a fighter and he would beat it. But sadly, he wouldn't. The prognosis was that this would only get worse. He moved back into his family home, but alternated staying in his kids' rooms until closer to the end, where he stayed in the primary suite with Connie. According to his executive assistant, Jenny Quirk, Connie would invite different pastors by the house to see him, none of whom he actually had a relationship with. Jenny felt as if Connie was parading him around versus actually being a caring spouse. But despite how anyone felt, Walter was dying, and on November 1st, 1999, sadly, he departed the world. Now, Jenny began to assist Connie and Walter's moms with the funeral plans. She began to gather a guest list for the private services, and there was one person who definitely thought she was going to be invited and wasn't. That's right, Lita. Kim Tucker, the executive director of Walter's charity, basically told Lita that, baby, face the facts. You were always the side piece. I don't care what you thought. I don't care who knew about you. You will always be seen as the homewrecker, and you don't want this. All right? Like, just let it go. Somebody else who wasn't invited to the funeral was Nigel, Walter's secret child from his affair from the 80s. Now, allegedly, Connie did learn about Nigel towards the end of Walter's life, but the assumption is that's where that started and stopped. So after 46 years of life, Walter Payton's sweetness, the legend himself, was gone, with family and friends trying to make sense of his absence in the days and months afterwards. Lita would move on as her heart tried to heal from the relationship. Jared would go on from Miami to play professional football like his dad, but is currently now a Chicago sports anchor and a business owner, and he's married with 2 kids. Now, his sister Brittany is a podcast host and works for a sports betting company. She is also married with 2 kids, and Connie remarried in 2008, but is believed to have gotten a divorce in 2010. She seems to be enjoying her golden years with her beautiful grandchildren and her babies. And that, Runners, concludes the love story of Walter Payton. Now, outside of his very complex love life, he was one of the most dominant running backs in the NFL, and he helped to make the Chicago Bears one of the most successful teams of the 1980s. There is so much to his story that I really wasn't able to include today. If you are interested in learning more about him, I would highly suggest that you read Sweetness, The Enigmatic Life of Walter Payton by Jeff Pearlman. Also read his autobiography, Never Die Easy, and Payton by Connie Jarrett and Brittany Payton. I'll include the links to those books and the articles that assisted in my research in the notes below. I hope hope you enjoyed this week, so I'll tell you what. Please don't forget to follow and subscribe everywhere you can. And don't forget to leave a podcast review, even if you watch the episodes here. Check the links in the notes below if you want to support the show, grab some merch like this shirt, or donate a coin or two. Thank you if you do. Now, next week will be another I'll Tell You Too, where I will give you more context on any of the comments or the questions that you've left on any of the episodes recently. So if you have any comments or questions or thoughts, go ahead and say it now, and we will discuss all of that next week. We will continue to dive more into football love stories in October. See you in the pews.